Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Conversations Around the Table. On this episode, we are going to be diving deep into female empowerment, passions, and taking risks and chances. And joining me today is Melissa Kiguwa. She is a businesswoman, entrepreneur, host, writer, content creator, and she's here today to have a conversation with us on how she does it all. Welcome.
Hi. I'm happy to be here.
I want to start off by saying, I know that we've, our communication has been, mainly on, a virtual setting, emails, some Zoom calls. But from what I have learned and taken from that time with you, as well as just even diving into your brand, is I think it's fair to say as a statement that you're a powerhouse.
Aww.
I just love the more that I get to learn more about you, that I'm just I want to be like her. And I think, and honestly, that's something that I think at any age, should never go away for anybody, to have sort of these, I think that way with a lot of my friends where I'm just I want to be like you when I grow up. We're the same age or whatever, but I just love that. And I feel there's
mutual admiration.
Yes.
Mutual admiration for sure. I love that.
And so as we talk about that, people are going, wow, why is she a powerhouse? Let's figure that out. I wanted to connect with you about your organization Breakthrough. Mm-hmm. So those who don't know, who are just kind of learning more about you right now, is what would you give us an introduction of a Breakthrough?
Yeah. So Breakthrough is my second company. It is in the personal transformation space. I like to say that we save women's lives, literally. And this is how you and I connected, through Ideas Collide, sponsoring someone who has gone through Breakthrough. So we have two different tranches. The first tranche is in the executive coaching space. So basically, we work with founders, investors, senior leaders, women who are really trying to catapult to that stratospheric level of their careers or their lives. And we match make them with amazing executive coaches. And sometimes I feel like the word coach isn't even enough, right? Coaching is not therapy, so we're not going to be with you for 5 years, but certainly we sort of can see the context of your life and see what are the gaps, what's missing, how do you connect and be in alignment with all yourselves so that you can move forward. So our coaches are all women identified, really prolific, had prolific careers before transitioning to being executive coaches. And one she started NASA's coaching program.
Wow.
Another woman, used to hang out with Gloria Steinem back in the day. So really amazing, formidable women. I call them the Council of Sages. So that's one tranche. You get match made to a coach and you're doing intense work with them for 6 to 12 months. But the result of that is, maybe suddenly you came in thinking that you had lost your confidence and now you're negotiating $10 million deals, right? You come in and you thought oh, listen, I'm just happy to be at this mid-level position. And now suddenly you're going in for the promotions for SVP, right? Which also is $100K increase in your salary, right? Substantial things that are meaningful for yourself, the life you live, and your legacy. And then in the second tranche, we have a year program that we do. It's a leadership program, and that's for women leaders as well. And we work with corporate clients who kind of want to support their female leadership in a way that is fun, cost-effective, but really transformational. So
I love that. And that's the thing. I feel like I've always had this essence. I grew up with so many women, whether they're aunts or my mother, my grandmother, but also I'm one of 4 sisters, one of 4 daughters. And now being a mother myself to a little girl, I am any chance I can just feed up this women, female empowerment and growth, because, and especially those of color. Yeah. There are a lot of things that, at a young age, we were sort of not necessarily told that wasn't possible, but the tools weren't there. Yeah. The opportunities weren't there. And I love this because this is definitely feeding both of those aspects of here's the tools, here's the opportunity, and also that you are 100% capable and worthy of this. Because I think sometimes as women, especially women of color, we question that a lot. At least I know I do.
Yeah, we do. And the data backs it too. So sometimes I get questions on why women specifically, like, wouldn't men also need these things? And, and it's totally fair. Not every man has like the confidence that we portray men to have, but the data bears out. There's this really brilliant Harvard Business Review article done from this professor from, of course, when I'm on a podcast, I'm going to blank his name. You can put it in the show notes. I'll send it to you. But his research really tracked women and men's networking sort of tactics, right? Mm-hmm. What works? What allows you to accelerate? And so men have their tactics that we've read about over the years. It's like the Napoleon Hill. It's the think rich, grow rich, or poor dad, rich dad, that kind of stuff, right? Well, for women, the data is very clear. Like, we need 2 to 4 women in our inner circle to be able to accelerate professionally. Men don't need that. They can do other things that are more short term to kind of hack it and get ahead. We actually do need long-term relationships with people we trust that we can go to very privately and say, I'm thinking about this company. What do you think? We need women that we can go to and role play. And in fact, it does have to be women. And so I think that as we learn these things about the differences and what's needed to accelerate, I should also add that having an inner circle of 2 to 4 women in your life as a woman professional can increase your career potential by 2.5 levels. So if you are a manager, that's getting you to associate VP, right? If you're associate VP, that's SVP, and then what goes up after that, right? General manager, maybe. So like that, when we just consider like, what does it mean to live a life and how big can you live your life? And it's just these not little, but intentional things of curation that we can do. So that's kind of what I look at. That's what interests me. And with Breakthrough, we come in and we're like, what does the data show? And how can we curate that so that we can move. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be so difficult. Building my first company, it was difficult. When I look at what my cousins are going through, my nieces, when I look at like my cousins, my moms and things like that, it's always so difficult, right? Like, I come from a generation of people that survived war, trauma, right? Like real things in my lineage. And I'm like, does it have to be so hard? No.
Yeah.
How do we do that? No.
And I love too, and I think that's one of the things that, that especially for a program like this, is that coaching, that mentorship, like you mentioned, is because there has been like this sort of tainted sort of like cover of, women against women and, Can
I can I speak to that?
Yes.
Because they call it queen bee syndrome, right? When you're in a space and you want all the resources to yourself, right? And maybe to the detriment of the women around you. But in order for a queen bee to arise, you have to be in an incredibly toxic environment already, right? You are in a scarcity-ridden space where you feel as though I have no access to anything, so I have to protect myself. That's what that means. So when you see queen bee behavior, understand that this is a problematic space. This is not about shared resources. It's not a work environment or a work culture that allows people to get up based on meritocracy, right? So like, if you see queen bee behavior, understand that it's indicative of the environment. It's not indicative of the individual.
Yeah.
And there's data around that too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's kind of what I was thinking too, because it's definitely not, I don't think it's an intentional thing that people do. It's almost like this, survival thing of, especially like I'm saying, I kind of, referring to women, but even thinking of my own experience as a woman of color, I'm just like, there can only be one.
Yeah.
And like, and then you feel like, you feel very protective of it. Yeah. But then again, like you said, it is this representation of sort of what the space is.
Yeah.
And how that feeds into it. And so
because you literally know there's only one. It's Game of Thrones and you're fighting for your position.
Yeah.
Right. And when you think about it like that, that makes sense. This person is fighting, Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to backtrack a little bit. To like what initially inspired you to then, so I guess, what were you doing prior to like forming Breakthrough?
Yeah. So prior to Breakthrough, I was running another company in the luxury rental space, trying to run a luxury fashion business during COVID. Oh my gosh,
wow.
that's a whole that's a whole podcast. We might need some like I don't know, Xanax, some Kleenex, some other things. And even before that, so I started my career as a writer, as a journalist. I traveled the world doing that. I lived in East Africa for a number of years, South America, I was in China, did a little bit with the BBC. So that was kind of the trajectory, but realized that, you know, entrepreneurship was really exciting. I couldn't see myself being like a full-time writer for the rest of my life. And so I took a leap. And that's a big thing I talk about too, audacity, you know?
Yeah, that's huge. Cause like even putting myself in that position to think of like what I'm doing, what I know is my day to day, then all of a sudden just being like, you know what, I'm going to switch that up.
Yeah.
It is. Well, cause I even like kind of get a little bit panicked when I switch up my route to work. I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm just gonna like, I don't know, like, is it gonna get me there faster? Like, is it gonna be there quicker? Like there is so many things that come from that change. And I, you know, that big part of it is like, just the risk. Mm-hmm. Like there's so much that comes with the risk of it doing so well, or the risk of it just not landing the way that you wanted it to. And so would you say, I guess like starting that process, did it feel like fairly easy, or what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced of making this pivot in life?
Yeah, I made a lot of pivots, but I kind of want to throw the question back to you. I'm a podcast host, I can't help it. What's your relationship to risk? So you mentioned that it's, you know, you're like even changing things up in terms of route. Like when you think of doing something risky, like how does it feel in your body?
I think because I'm a person, and it's funny because my sister just sent me this like TED talk about letting go and not having so much control. Because I am very much a type A person where I'm like, great, got it. This is my schedule, itinerary, perfect. And then so when things do go off of that, I feel like I'm losing this sense of control that makes me feel safe, that makes me feel like with a little bit more planted to the ground. And so when things, whether it's something that just, you know, you have to go with the flow, or something where I'm intentionally going, okay, I need to switch something up. It does feel a little bit like swimming in the deep end for the first time. You know, you can't feel the ground, but you're staying afloat. But there is like this, okay, I don't know what's underneath me. I don't know what's happening. And so there is like this sense of like, this great adrenaline, but also, I don't want to say panic, because I don't feel like I'm panicking, but there is like a sense of just like the unknown. Yeah. The anxiety, the unknown. And I feel like I'm definitely that person. Like the unknown it's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything you've said is true, right? Like being on this side and having taken risks, there's nothing you've said that's different in my experience, right? I just say, do it anyway. There's nothing you've said that is different from what you will experience. All those things are very real. But I also like to say, like, you have to pay attention to the truth of your life. Like, what do you need in this life of yours up to what you've had now? Perhaps safety is really important to you. I don't know your childhood. I don't know what you've experienced. I don't know the level of safety you've felt. Maybe for yourself right now, the best thing you can do is provide yourself that. It's for you to look at, right? But maybe you reach a point in your life where you say, all right, little me, I have taken care of you. I've fed you. I've provided you a safe bed to sleep in. But now we got to go. We got to get out of the house a little bit. We have to see more because we can do more. But you have to look at the truth of your life. If that is what calls to you, follow it. You don't practice audacity because it's a practice. You lean in and you deal with the repercussions of leaning in, right? You don't do that for safety. You do it for evolution.
Mm-hmm.
You do it for growth. You do it to play with life and see how far you can expand yourself, but you certainly don't do it for safety. That's not promised, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And I love like this referral of, because I know I tend to do it. I refer a lot to my like inner child.
Yeah.
And, I had just recently, I'm again, that growth. I signed up for this certification program.
I saw that on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yeah. I celebrated.
And that was my thing. I was like, when I was like, can I handle this? Or can I handle another thing on my plate?
Mm-hmm.
And it was more of like, for me, talking to myself and my inner child, because I'm always hungry for more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely like how I like have my outlook on life is people think of like, you're taking on too much, you're doing this. And to some reality that could be true, but I also am just like hungry to experience things.
Yeah.
Which I know that kind of sounds like I'm contradicting myself because I'm like, I like to have
I totally understand
stability.
what it is. Yeah.
But there is like this inner, dynamic with yourself, and whether it's like a present self and your inner child or your future self, like, there's so many people that you're talking to, and wanting to think about. And I think that's really important as women, but like women of color I don't know how much you refer back to your child, thinking about like what they were dreaming about and what they were thinking about, what they were wanting in life, and whether that like is exactly what you're doing now. I know it's not entirely, I was like, I'm going to be an actress. I'm going to be on the Oscars.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, no, I don't know if I could handle that. I don't know if I could handle like being in like the media in that sense.
Yeah.
But I'm at a place too where I can see and be like, okay, what she was really wanting was to be seen. And so like now, with like my friendships and my dynamics, like a lot of that is this being seen and making sure that my friends also feel seen by me. So that's like a really important thing for me. And
that's beautiful.
I'm curious to know, like, how has, this bringing your inner child along, this experience, like how's that shaped the decisions that you make or the risks that you take?
Yeah, what a beautiful question. The inner child, I mean, she's a child. So sometimes she's like too loud, like, girl, you gotta calm down, go take a nap. But I'm sort of processing everything you've been saying. And I'm thinking about like, even coming back a little bit to when you were saying like, I want to do more, but, still like be within the container of like what feels safe. And I think there's a practicality to that. You can almost allow yourself to do more by having like a ground. Like if I have friends who are like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, I'm like, don't quit your job. Like did that, have the bills to pay for it, had the like, messed up credit score to pay for it. You got to build that stuff back up. So there's real practicality of, what it means to sort of take leaps. But I have a contrarian viewpoint about even this idea of taking on too much. I keep coming back to, you have to know the truth of your life. There's the Chinese idea of qi, right? Like your life force, your energy. Nigerians have that as well. Your qi is not my qi. My life force is not your life force. So if I have more life force than you, let me operate to the capacity of my life force, right? Like don't worry about me, worry about yourself, So I say that you have to do what you're here to do. And so coming back to my inner child, I think that the thing that I offer my inner child is that I just honor like whatever you have within you. I'm going to try and allow us to explore it. I'm going to let us have. And I think that, again, with women, I think a lot of people don't have this mindset. But in particular, we come from lineages and stories that tell us how to stay safe, right? Don't put your brown or black body in certain situations because violence may come upon you. And the data shows that often it does, right? Don't go for that. We don't get that. Keep yourself safe, protect yourself, right? And so again, coming back to this idea of my audacious sort of way that I move in the world is I tell my little girl, if you've got something within you, we're going to explore it, but that doesn't mean you're going to be safe, right? So that's been my work, is around like, you know, and I think, and I get the environment we're in, where we're looking for safe and safer spaces. And that is so important, because I think what we're looking for is a foundation to grow from. Allow me a sense of safe consistency so that I can explore my ideas. But I kind of push back and I say, well, the world is inherently not safe. Mm-hmm. Safety is an illusion. It's an illusion. We're not promised anything, even our own lives.
Yeah.
So when you just are okay with that, then you kind of look at like, okay, well, what can we do?
What you just said reminded me of something my dad used to tell me, because when I first started going to college to Arizona State, I was living at my grandmother's house, which she would never live there during the weekday. And she lived not in the best part of Phoenix. And to me, I never thought about that because I grew up there. So I just thought of like, oh, that's just the neighborhood. And I remember I would be out late and I would this and that. I would be at that house by myself. And I remember my dad was like, he's like, you're not invincible. And at 17, I remember I was like, oh, this is good stuff. Cause I was a writer too. And I was like, oh, okay, let me put that down in my next.
I am not invincible. Yeah. Right.
But it's true, because I think we do, that it is this like a double edged sword, because you want to live life to the best and not feel trapped in any kind of parameter. But at the same time too, there is like this level of consciousness and cautiousness
There's a big cautiousness.
Yeah. Because you do want to be around to be able to do all these things.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, because like I mentioned, writing is something is a passion of mine too. Yeah. And so when I heard that about you, I was like, well, what can't you do? I was like, I love that. And I think that also makes sense that, and I would love for you to share more about this, but I know that through Breakthrough, you guys just released a new journal.
Yeah.
And I love that, because then I was going to ask, how have you been kind of, as much as you're in the data and in like the logistics of running this, business and this brand, how is it of a natural thing or something that you have to consciously think about of like pulling in pieces that are more of like passions and hobbies and things like that you pull in and get to still have your hands in?
It's so interesting that I've been getting this question quite a bit, actually. And it's so, the way that it was described to me even, so I had Martha Beck on my podcast, and Martha Beck is Oprah's life coach. She's like worked with her for 17 years. She does Super Soul Sunday with her all the time. And then after the episode where she was on my podcast, she invited me on hers. And so we recently did that. And the thing she kind of kept coming back to, she's like, how have you been able to create a life for yourself in the material world and have this like rich spiritual world? Like that's kind of like how she's, summarized it. Like how have you grown the wisdom as you've been like moving in the world? What I'd say is just immense adversity. I've gone through some really hard things, but there are two options. You stay down, right? And that is a path. You can stay on the floor. You can self-loathe. You can become addicted to certain things or behaviors, people, right? You can feel your life limit you. But I made a promise to my little girl, which is that we're not going to do that. So we have to get up. And inevitably, every time you get up, you will have learned some things from being down, but you also have met some new people, grown some new skills. You fight for your life. And as you fight for your life, you pick up some pretty cool habits. So that's what I'll say. There's no trick. There's no fast. You don't get up the stairs through the elevator. You take it step by step by step. I've just shown up and done my work.
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because actually I just had this conversation yesterday. I'm divorced. I'm still really close with my former in-laws. And so I was actually at their house yesterday for dinner, and I was talking to them, and we were having this discussion about like the hardships in life. And and I, as we're just talking about that, I was saying, I was like, you know what, there was a time like 4 years ago or maybe even 2 years ago when I was really in the deep of it, where I was like, can we just get through this? Can this just can I just fast forward this?
Yeah, I feel that all the time.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm so done.
I'm so done. I get it.
Yeah. That's what I'm like, the lesson learned.
Yeah. Got it.
But then when you're past it,
yeah,
I'm able to be like, well, I'm actually glad that I like went through that. And every hard night, every hard, sort of text message or anything that I read, like the verbal stuff that was said to me, I'm grateful for it, because I was telling him, I was like, I know that those 4 years I changed, not only as a person. I go, and I pointed to my daughter and I was like, she has I think a better version of me, and I'm a better mother because of it.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, there's,
that's beautiful.
All the things.
What do you think you've learned, and what do you think are the gifts you now have that you can give to your daughter through this process?
More resilience, more independent. I definitely was a person who just codependent on people. And which was interesting, because growing up, I didn't have that dynamic. My parents really kind of let us, my parents are great, but they weren't the type to like hover too much over decisions, but they were very strict. And I just kind of became, I definitely, when I got into a relationship, was just like, oh, I feel taken care of. And like, I don't have to do that work anymore.
Safe.
Yes.
It was safe.
So I was like, I don't have to do that work anymore. So then, 10 years later, when that ended, I struggled so much to be like, because I was pregnant when, this separation happened. I was like, how am I going to bring a child into this world? Am I going to be able to even take care of her by myself? Am I able to do, like, I really questioned myself as just a functioning human. Like, am I going to be able to provide for her? Am I going to be a good version? Because especially when something traumatic like that happens, you question you as an individual. So I was like, I was the cause of this, or I wasn't as good enough of a person to have that person hold on to me too. And, you really go through all these things, but I feel like I'm more resilient. Now it's hard for me to even ask for help because I've gone to the point too where I do the work by myself. And I also really like that I've done the work. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time with myself the last 4 years. And I think that's the most time I've spent with myself. Even the previous years before that, obviously being in a committed relationship for 10 years. And then before that being like with, in a household with sisters and parents. So having this time, even as with the child, I had many nights where I'm just thinking about so what do I want now? I have this clean slate now in some ways. I go, what do I want to do with it? And, I began to be like, okay, well, I know I want to put myself back into the work that I'm doing. I want to put myself back into catering to myself. So, I do a lot of things now that I didn't do then that nurture me, and whether that's like working out or that's journaling. That's one thing. That's why when you gave me the copy of the journal, I was so excited, because the last 4 years, I have written so much more than I have in the last 10 years. Yeah. And I think it's because, my mind and like what I was going through.
You had nothing else to do.
Yeah. And there's so much for me. That was so much, like you said, like the noise. You're just like, there's so much. I'm like, okay, let me just kind of get it out. So it's not always in there. Because sometimes I know I can be a person that I sit with a lot of things. And to me, when I write, it is this form of releasing that. Yeah. Not to say like, okay, it's fully done. No. But there is like getting to write it out is like talking it out. Yeah. And so, so having that journal, I was just like, yes, prompts. Tell me what I should be like diving into and getting into. And so that's definitely would say that.
I love that. You've been doing your own personal transformation work. And there's something around action. That's a real thing. Momentum's a real thing. Allowing yourself the space to feel the things. It's a gift you give yourself. and then acting on it. It's a big gift. We can answer some questions from the journal. Get deep. We're already deep. But.
Oh, I know. Oh, gosh. I know. I love, you know what? Let's do it. Do you have recommendations?
Ooh, let's see. I wouldn't remember the page number, but there's a question that I've been using myself. So anyone who's watching, the journal it's a self-coaching tool. So if you can't necessarily go through Breakthrough's program, you can at least access the depth of, self-exploration and transformation through this. It has different chapters, inner knowing, beauty, getting into motherhood, our relationship to it, the motherless, the mothered, struggling with becoming pregnant, IVF, all of those things. We tackle all of that. So anyway, one of the questions, it's got over 300 prompts, beautiful illustrations, a really exciting sort of like internal process. But one of the questions that I've loved is, and this, I'll even give context for it, in the entrepreneurship space, there are sort of like these books that are considered the holy grails, right? Like I mentioned Think and Grow Rich, or like Rich Dad Poor Dad, or like what's the other one? Like about friendship, one of those Dale Carnegie books, right? And I think that a lot of it is valid. They've helped so many people, but just inevitably, as the world continues to shift and our demographics shift, people will need different sorts of narratives that they can relate to. That's just the nature of what happens when the world opens up and we really do have more diverse people at the table. They're just going to hear things differently based on their own lived experiences. And so something, it's kind of like metaphysical woo-woo, but something that I think Napoleon Hill or something wrote was, when he has a really serious business question, he'll think of like Vanderbilt and Abraham Lincoln and things like that, and have a commune with them and ask them questions, right? And I said, well, what's the woman version of that, right? Like, what are the women that I would ask to help me with really serious things that I'm going through? And so that's one of the questions, which is like, think of your council of women, can be 3 or 4, dead, alive, historical fiction, and talk to them. Ask them what advice they have to give you. So when I'm going through really hard business things, I think of Madam C.J. Walker, first millionaire woman in the United States, first woman millionaire, a Black woman, right? Came up as a maid, right? Born in I'm going to mess it up, but I mean, essentially built her business in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Okay. You think you got business issues today, honey? Try 1901. Okay. Right. Coming up as a poor Black maid. So even if I have things around like, I don't want to charge too much, right? Like I read somewhere that she used to charge like 60% of her clients' salaries. Like they were other maids that made like $1.20, and she was like, mine's 60 cents. Like, you want it, you got to pay for it. I'm like, okay. So what would Madam C.J. Walker teach me about business and resilience and grit, and tell me to get up and go get it? I love the story of Cleopatra. She spoke multiple languages, was a beautiful singer, ruled Egypt in its profundity, right? Her people loved her. She used to do festivals of abundance. It was colorful in the streets. So when I just think about like remembering who I am, like what would Cleopatra tell me about like walking in the world and being my full self, like untamed, unencumbered, like show up, speak the languages. Don't worry about intimidating people. Force them to level up, right? I think of another woman I think of that I've been speaking to. Her name was Wangari Maathai, first African woman to win a Nobel Peace Prize. She planted trees, was passionate, used to talk to trees. So when I think of like, I'm in the business world and I have to be so serious, Wangari would tell me like, hey, like talk to a tree. They're here for life. They give you life. We exist around them. So I just think, wow, like I come from a lineage of really powerful women. What a gift that I have access to the internet and resources and all these things to learn about them. And then I speak to them. And that's something we all have. That doesn't cost money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know. I like when I think about it, luckily I feel really fortunate that and I can feel the same with you, that you do have a good core of women around you. My grandmother passed away when I was 19, and to this day, it's like one of those that just like still hits the way it does, because she was so, I mean, like the tiniest things, like just the biggest advocate for us. And she, she had, she was the youngest of her family. She had to drop out, I think about 7th grade to take care of her mother who was sick. And her father had another family that he would go down the street and be with. And just like the things that she went through, and she was the most positive, hopeful, optimistic person. And I remember thinking that even at a young age, I was like, how can this and I would even like, your friend doesn't invite you to a birthday party. I'm like, my life is over. And I was like, but at the age that she was, to have to leave school and put her mother while being first, and her, and my mother ended up passing away from the sickness that she had. But I like to reflect back to whenever I feel like I'm losing that resilience or I'm losing that optimism, I think about her. And even up until the day that she was also very in tune with, whatever anyone believes, like either her faith, like, a higher being, spirituality. She was very in tune with it, because it, at some point would even tell her, that's too morbid. Like, she's like, I know my time is coming up. She's like, I feel it. And I was like, that's so morbid. Don't say that. But she was very in tune with that. And that's like something that I like valued with her, was like her ability just to have faith and have trust in whatever it was, and in the process of life. And so that definitely would be one. And I love that. She would tell us stories too of going to school, and especially here in Arizona back in the day, like when she would speak Spanish, that was a very big no-no in the classroom. And I remember once she told the story of how she said, the day that I stopped speaking Spanish at school was, she's like, I said something to a friend, and the teacher pulled me up, and I got hit in front of everybody, and like basically we made an example of like, this is why you don't do that, like that's not, we speak English, that kind of thing. And I remember just like thinking of these like little things, and just being like, whoa, I like to recover from that, or to have that kind of sort of a I guess, like, for lack of a better word, attack on like who you are as an individual, and still be able to rise above it, and be able to nurture those around you. I mean, she definitely was always taking the higher ground. And I used to always be like,
you were like, Grandma, light it up.
I was like,
light it up.
I would tell her too. And she would always like, and she had this great analogy, which I'm going to like butcher, but it was something where she was just like, I can't remember. It was like, she was like, would say something like, well, why would I spit at someone's face when the wind is blowing, knowing like that could come back to me? Or it was something of like that, where she
one
was
of those proverbs, like, like wisdom proverbs.
I was like, I guess,
you're like, spit back, Grandma.
So just fight against it. But no, I think about her, but that there are a lot of women in history, like people know her as like just Selena, but Selena Quintanilla, to me, like that was my Britney, my Madonna growing up. And I remember, because I come from a household where, I'm first generation on my dad's side, and about second generation on my mom's side. And my parents definitely instilled a lot of culture in us, a lot of like our heritage. But one thing that we didn't quite get the full experience was like to learn the languages as frequently or consistently as like my cousins and so forth. And I remember I would always feel so self-conscious about that. And I remember like seeing her, she was like not fluent, but she taught herself. And there'd be times she's doing an interview and she would mess up. And instead of being like, I imagine myself, I'd be like so embarrassed and be like, oh yeah, sorry. And she'd be like, oh, that's right. And she would laugh and be like, and just kind of have
grace. She gave herself grace.
Exactly. And I remember just seeing that. I was like, oh, I love that. I love that she wasn't, which if anyone who watches the movie, the Selena movie, knows that the part where Edward James almost says like, you're never Mexican enough for the Mexicans, you're never American enough for the Americans. And I very much felt like that as, first, second generation. But to see that reflected in like this persona, and also reflected in this movie that people love, I was like, oh, I hope people understand now. Like that's you just want people to.
That's the tension. But also seeing her do it in a graceful way, right? Like just seeing how she navigated that in her body. It didn't have to necessarily be a sense of like self denigration. She was able to just play with it and be like, okay, beautiful.
But I love that kind of prompt. I love that idea of like thinking about who were these women before me, and what could have I learned from them?
Yeah, what do they have to tell me?
Yeah, because you're right. They went through some different times, real stuff,
some real things.
Yeah, and to put that in perspective, doesn't lessen what you're experiencing or feeling, but it does help you see it differently, and give you more of like that, like I can do it.
Yeah, that's all we need.
And I love that. That's one thing too that I, this. Maybe it's like this admiration of like what you do, like with your podcast, is you get to talk to so many wonderful, dynamic, just everyone brings something different and has their strengths and weaknesses. I just love that kind of experience. And I'm sure like you've gotten to talk to so many wonderful people. What have been some of the I know they all kind of rank up there, but have there been any that really stood out to you in terms of these conversations that have impacted you as an individual?
Yeah. One that just pops to my mind, and it's more about what she went through. So I speak to women around the world, so it's global, who have done, I like to say, like, have pushed against the status quo in an extraordinary way and achieved results. So that can be financially, like Kara Golden, who built like a $200 million company, Hint, beverage water company. Arlen Hamilton, who built like a $10 million venture fund while homeless, right? Or it can be Marianne Williamson, who ran for president, or Martha Beck, who's Oprah's life coach. We've had poets like Nikki Giovanni, the OG, Joy Harjo, who's the U.S. Poet Laureate. So we've had amazing women. But the woman that sticks out to me the most, it's not based on her accolades, it's based on her inner transformation. Her name is Jessica Buchanan. She was a development sort of like aid worker in Somalia. And during sort of like, she had like a conference that she had to go facilitate, and was kidnapped by land pirates. And held hostage for 93 days in the Somali desert. Didn't know if she was going to die, survive. I think they were trying to ransom them for like $40 million, which she was like, oh, kill me now. No one's paying that, right? And I think the amazing thing about Jessica is when she tells you about the work that she did. So I think it was day 43. So she talks about like, she had, even before that, her mom had passed away, and she had wanted to go to like an ashram for a year or something and just cry it out, just have time to really process her mother, the grief. But when she was in the desert, she goes, it dawned on her, maybe this is my ashram. Like, this is my, because yeah, I'm kidnapped and it's wildly physically uncomfortable, and I'm drinking water with diesel when I'm drinking water. Like, it's highly uncomfortable, but you're sitting in the desert all day, right? She's like, so it's like, apart from the discomfort and the body things, which, you adapt to, I'm sitting in the desert. So she started thinking through her whole life from birth, and just thinking through all the moments of tension she'd had with other people or just in life. And she started digging holes in the sand, in the ground, and started burying the grudges. And, kind of doing her own ceremony, right? And, of course, the pirates are looking at her like, crazy white lady, what is going on over there? But she's like, I'm in the wild, I'm going to get wild, And she said when she got out, she was rescued by the same Navy elite SEALs team that killed Osama bin Laden, right? 93 days later. But she goes, but when I left that desert, I left everything there. Like, I was a new woman, So a story like that kind of reminds you that, all right, this life, we're not promised anything, but we're promised everything, depending on what the truth of your life is, and how you show up to it. That's like, we're born and we die in between, right? Mm-hmm. That's what we're figuring out. We can't control what happens to us. We can't control where we came from. Jessica says this beautiful line. She goes, when life gets really, really, really hard, you're not cursed. God has not forgotten you. You're not wrong. It's just the deck of hands you were given. and you decide how you rise up in it. That's all. You know, you're just playing with your deck of cards, as beautiful as it may be, as privileged as it may be, as hard as it may be, as, you know, like destitute as it may be. It's yours. It's yours. What else is there to do? You know?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't imagine having that kind of experience. But what an experience to make out of that.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, and that's the thing too. It's like I'm sure she never thought like, well, whenever I get into that kind of position.
No, none of us are thinking that.
That's how I'm going to deal with it.
I'm like, I'm going to stop by Sprouts on my way home, get some oat milk. Like,
yeah, it is. Yeah, that's definitely not on the list of prompts that I'm going to go through. But yeah, what a great like platform is just overall, like that's one thing as I started to. And that was really, obviously got on board with the Ideas Collide team, but that was really what I was like, yes. Like immediately I was like, I want to empower more women's voices and their stories and their perspectives. And they have a lot to say, a lot of worthy things to say.
Yeah.
But also in general, like with Breakthrough, just like the program that it goes through. So to kind of wrap everything up, as we close this out is, for those who are listening who are thinking about taking a risk, whether it's business venture, whether it's a personal endeavor, what would at least be one piece of advice that you would give them?
The best piece of advice would be to email me. You need me in your life, is what I would say.
Which that's a great segue too, because I was like, how can people learn more?
Yeah.
Because I want people to be able to, like, not only with like the journal, like even if it's like starting there.
Yeah.
Even if it's 100%. Like doing the work for yourself first to figure out like, okay, where do I need to go next?
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, kind of let people know where they can further explore these opportunities.
Yeah. So I put out a lot of content so that you can get stuff for free, right? So the podcast is always a great way. That's the idealistspodcast.co. You can follow me on Instagram. I've just started posting more on Instagram. My team tells me I need to be more visible. So you can find me at Melissa Kiguwa on Instagram. And then if you go to our website, you can find the journal and order a copy if you'd like that. Or you can email me at melissa@theidealistpodcast.co if you're like, I need a deeper conversation and I'd like to explore what those programs are, you know. But there's we've done a lot to put out a lot of free stuff out there so that you can kind of get in and get your daily dose. But if you're like, I need more, then holler at your girl.
Yeah, everyone, please do. I promise you won't be disappointed. So thank you so much for joining us. I very much enjoyed this conversation. I felt like it was very therapeutic for me too. So thanks, Melissa. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for this beautiful space, and thank you for Ideas Collide. You were really the champion saying like Ideas Collide needs to do something with Breakthrough. So thank you for your work. We need people in the room to be able to say, let's make this happen. So
anytime. All right. Thanks, guys, for listening. Until next time, we'll talk to you later. Bye.